Thanks very much. It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to give some closing remarks at the end of the GW Global Forum. I'm not going to try to summarize the wide-ranging and rich discussions we've had over the course of the day. In fact, the discussions have been so exciting, I've been losing my voice. And if my voice goes out altogether, Frank's going to come back and read my remarks, and I'll lip sync along with him. But what I'm going to try to do over the next 10 minutes or so is place our discussions today in a broader context, global context and a GW context, where the world is going and what it means for our university. As Dean of GW's Elliott School of International Affairs, I spend a fair amount of time thinking about the future and where the world's going in the 21st century. I do this because we have a responsibility to educate our students for the lives and careers they will enjoy in the decades ahead. Later this year, along with my fellow deans, I'm going to be welcoming our new freshmen to campus. Our freshmen, as always, are 18 years old, and that means our new freshmen were born in 1994. They have no memory of the Cold War. They have no memory of the events of the 20th century. They have no memory of a world without the internet. As General Powell observed this morning, they were born digital. And as a dean, I'm mindful of the fact that most of our freshmen will be retiring from their jobs after the year 2050. So that's why I think about the 21st century. What will their world look like? Well, as the old saying goes, it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. That said, there's some things that we know with some confidence. We live in a growing, globalizing world. How is our world growing? I mean, let's start with the basics. Let's talk about population. Over the course of the 20th century, the world's population quadrupled from 1.6 to 6 billion people. In the first half of the 21st century, the world's population is going to increase by another 50% to 9 or even 9.5 billion people, an additional 3.5 billion people in the first half of this century. At least 95% of the increase is going to be in the developing world. That's the part of the world that is least capable of taking on the burdens generated by billions of additional people. In terms of food, water, healthcare, education, many countries with the weakest governmental capacities are the ones that are going to face the greatest challenges in the decades ahead. In addition, cities are growing. 100 years ago, 5% of the world's population lived in cities. Today it's 50% for the first time in human history. By 2050, 70% of the world's people will live in cities. And this is going to generate huge challenges for municipal governance. I mean, if you think city governance is bad now, I can guarantee you it's going to be even more challenging in the future as megacities proliferate around the world. So how's the world growing in terms of these population factors, overall population trends, population shift to the developing world, population movement to cities? You can see that the 3 Ps are going to play a big role in the world in the decades ahead. And then there's the 3 Es, economic development, energy use, and environmental damage. General Powell referred to these this morning. In the current situation with many countries still coming out from the recession and many countries struggling with economic problems, we sometimes forget that the global economy has doubled since 1990. And that's a great thing. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of extreme poverty. But we live in a world where the population is going to keep growing, and so looking ahead, continued economic development is not a luxury. It's an absolute necessity. The global economy is going to have to keep growing just to maintain the current level of per capita income. And we live in a world where 1 billion of our fellow human beings live on less than $1 US per day, which is simply unacceptable. So continued economic growth is going to be absolutely essential. And if we can avoid another downturn, it's quite possible that the global economy will double again by the year 2030. That's good news, but it has implications. It means that energy use is going to keep going up by at least 50% in the next couple of decades. And if current trends continue, at least 80% of the new energy, the additional energy, will come from fossil fuels, which is bad for the environment. Now, along with our growing world, of course, we live in a globalizing world, and globalization is multidimensional, as you've heard over the course of our discussions today. The 4 Gs of globalization include increasingly dense global communication, an increasingly interdependent global economy, increasingly interconnected global cultures, in a world where increased governmental action is needed to deal with these global challenges. Now, if you put all this together, the 3 Ps, the 3 Es, and the 4 Gs, you have 10 pegs that will help to shape the world in the first half of the 21st century. Now, I understand this is not a comprehensive list of every global development we need to keep in mind, but it's a pretty good list and a pretty good place to start. Our growing world is going to generate mounting pressures in the decades ahead. Our globalizing world is going to generate increasingly complicated and complex challenges. As the American philosopher Yogi Berra observed, the future ain't what it used to be. Now, how will this story turn out? Will it have a happy ending? Well, it could have a happy ending, and I certainly hope that the future will see peace, prosperity, and justice. But as someone who studies security issues, I know that it could also lead to instability, inequality, and injustice. And we'll probably see some combination of the above. A key factor in the equation that's going to determine the shape of the future is what we do, individually and collectively. We're going to have to manage all of the problems I just mentioned and a lot of other problems I didn't have time to discuss. We're also going to have to prevent catastrophes, because I'm trying to be upbeat. I'm not talking too much about catastrophes, but there are things we need to worry about. The possibility of global pandemics, the possibility of global financial or economic catastrophe, nuclear terrorism. These are all very bad things that we have to avoid. And at the same time, we have to be creative and innovative in taking advantage of the opportunities that might be generated by science, technology, and international cooperation in the future. So how can we do a better job? What are the keys? Well, we're going to need better governance at every level in the decades ahead. We're going to need better governance at the village level in the developing world, better municipal governance around the world, better national governance in each and every one of the 193 member states of the United Nations. We're going to need more international cooperation so governments can work together to generate more effective regional and international action. International problems require international solutions. It's one of the truisms in the field of international affairs, but it's a truism that happens to be true. International problems require international solutions. Cooperation and global action will be needed in the decades ahead. In addition to general global governance and better governance, we're going to need good leadership, leadership that is strategic and pragmatic all at the same time. But in addition to all of that, we're going to need more action just at the individual level as well. The challenges we face cannot be solved by top-down action alone. The future is not up to government policy and government leaders all by themselves. In addition to the top-down actions they might take, we're also going to need to see more action from the bottom up in our villages and cities, in our nations and regions, working globally where we can. We're going to be working on our own as individuals, but many of us will also be working collectively through non-governmental organizations, through socially responsible corporations, building a stronger civil society. So from the top down and the bottom up, there's really quite a lot to do. And so how is this story going to turn out? Is our growing, globalizing world going to move in positive directions in the future? Well, I certainly hope it will, and it's going to depend very much on several key factors: leadership and citizenship, governance and policy, and our capacities for innovation in the future. Now, one of the reasons why I'm optimistic about the future is because I believe in the power of universities. Universities can do things that other institutions can't do or they don't do very well. Universities can do a really good job of looking pretty far into the future, to the year 2050 and beyond. Governments have a hard time doing that. Governmental leaders really have to focus on the crisis that's right in front of them. Think tanks usually focus on immediate policy challenges. Universities can look far into the future and can make long-term commitments to long-term problems. Universities can also adopt a more global perspective. Universities tend to be nonpartisan, which makes our recommendations more credible in the eyes of many around the world. Universities bring scholarly weight and rigor to bear on important problems, and understanding the problem is the first step toward devising a solution. And finally, universities are engines of research and innovation. All of this makes universities extremely important as we think about tackling the challenges of the 21st century. Great universities tackle the world's great problems, and GW is doing that, as you've seen over the course of the day here at the Global Forum. GW is also looking ahead, thinking about the university's strategic priorities for the future. Under the leadership of our provost, Dr. Stephen Lehrman, a new strategic plan is being developed, and that strategic plan is going to focus on many of the issues I've just touched on. The dynamics of globalization, the role of governance and policy, the contributions of leadership and governance, leadership and citizenship, and the importance of innovation in the future. The world's priorities are GW's priorities, and this is not a coincidence. GW is thinking about the future of the world so we can help shape the world in the decades ahead. This next decade in particular is a very exciting one, as you have heard already from President Knapp and Provost Lehrman. With the new strategic plan in place and with additional resources that we hope to bring to bear on these priorities, we hope and expect that the next decade will be a decade of transformation for the George Washington University in the run-up to our 200th anniversary in the year 2021. And that's all very exciting. As remarkable as GW is today, GW still has tremendous unrealized potential. And over the course of this next decade, GW really has the possibility of going from really terrific to truly great. There'll be many things that will contribute to that. One of the keys will be our extended community. GW is a great university, not just because of where we are, but because of who we are. GW is an extraordinary community of scholars, students, and staff, along with alumni, parents, and friends of the university. With your help, we will be able to take these next steps to strengthen the university so that we can have an even greater impact on our world in the decades ahead.